John Antonucci.
I'd like to begin communicating with you now. A little bit uncomfortable? A little bit challenging to not have words piercing the air? We are conditioned to speak. And when there's not enough being said, we have the tendency to speak even more. But there's a fella that understood the power of listening. So much so that it actually frustrated those who knew him well. His wife specifically did not appreciate his proclivity to listen. You see, they would go to these gatherings, these events, specifically ones that were work-related, and he would just listen. People would be sharing their experiences, their knowledge, their understanding, and he wouldn't utter much more than pleasantries. And on one particular evening, she became very frustrated because even with her limited knowledge of the subject, she was able to very quickly identify that others in the conversation were factually inaccurate about what they were saying. And yet her husband uttered not a word. When they got back to the vehicle, she slugged him on the arm and said, "Why do you do that? Why won't you say something? You know more than all those people in that room, and you just stand there like a buffoon. Why won't you speak?" He calmly looked at her and said, "I already know what I know. I want to know what they know." Communication is hard. We know that. We have all, I am sure, felt misunderstood, maybe even today. And there are other times that maybe we feel like we don't quite understand what the other person is saying. But our tactic usually, when there is misunderstanding possible, is to overcompensate by over-explaining. I know I'm guilty of that. I'll stand there talking for 3 minutes because I see a blank stare. And I just assume that if I can just say it one more way, it'll finally get through. When we think of communication styles, most of us have probably heard of 3 or 4 styles. Raise your hand if you've heard of passive communication. All right? How about aggressive communication? How about passive-aggressive? And maybe some of you have been in a communication class or workshop and they encouraged you to do away with passive or aggressive, and especially passive-aggressive, and rather stand in the place of assertive communication. Anybody ever heard of assertive communication? But what if we did away with all 4 of those and stepped into the place of receptive communication? A style of communication that seeks to understand. In his world-famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey's 5th habit is seek first to understand and then to be understood. What a concept. What an opportunity to genuinely desire to hear not just the words, but the intent and the heart of the person with which we are communicating. This involves what is often referred to as active listening. I prefer the term intentional listening. Intentional listening says 2 things without saying anything at all. It says, I care about you, and I care about what you're saying. But in order to get there, we have to have a shift of perspective and recognize that we don't know what we don't know. How many of you, and I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands this time, but how many of you have interrupted someone halfway through a sentence and said, "Oh, I know, but..." We all have. But did we know? Did we truly understand where they were coming from? Did we even pay attention long enough to know whether or not we knew and understood where they were coming from? And I submit for your consideration, the answer is usually no. A powerful tool that has helped me in this area is a simple question. Can you unpack that? It's very non-confrontational. It doesn't sound like, "What do you mean?" or "What are you even saying?" But it forces me to stop after I have heard something, pause, and say something to the effect of, "Can you unpack that so I'm sure that I understand what you mean by that?" It forces me to say, "Let me hear your heart, because I think I understand, but I might not." And the simple words, "Can you unpack that?" have aided in my understanding numerous times where, upon listening for a second time, without a heart of "I already know," but rather a heart of "I have something to learn," I realized I had no idea in the first place. The words "Can you unpack that?" are not magical. They don't fix everything. But if they represent a heart that genuinely wants to understand, they just may have a magical outcome. Mr. Toastmaster.